to the Sparks Talks webinar series brought to you by the Girls Action Foundation and the Light a Spark campaign. I am Elvira Tullia, and today I will be introducing you to Alexandra Spunt, who will join us in a moment for her webinar presentation. So Alexandra is the co-author of No More Dirty Looks, The Truth About Your Beauty Products and the Ultimate Guide to Safe and Clean Cosmetics. She works as a freelance journalist and marketing consultant in Los Angeles. She previously headed up the branding team at American Apparel, and before that she worked as a modeling agent and while in college as a television host. No More Dirty Looks has been featured in magazines, dailies, television shows, and online in the mainstream and alternative media. Together with her co-author, Siobhan O'Connor, Alexandra blogs daily at nomoredirtylooks.com. So I would like now pass things over to Alexandra, who will be presenting her webinar based on her book. Welcome to this webinar, Alexandra.
Thank you. All right, so today what I'm going to be talking about is what is in our personal care products. I want to just start with a couple of, hold on a second, PowerPoint. All right. I want to just start with a couple of facts to familiarize you guys with this topic. So, according to the Environmental Working Group, which is a group here in the United States that does all kinds of research on this sort of thing, we use about 12 products per day as women. Men apparently use about 6. I actually think that that's even a pretty low number. I mean, it's the average, but when the girls in LA that I know use a lot more than that. So we use these products, but many of us don't actually think about the ingredients that are in these products and the fact that we're absorbing them through our skin, we're sometimes eating them in the form of lipstick, or if you have cream on your hands, for instance, and you're like eating chips or something, and that we inhale them as powders, as fragrances, hairspray, what have you. As it currently stands, these ingredients are not actually regulated by the government or any third party. So the government can't force cosmetics companies to do safety testing. This is how it works in the States. It's very, very similar in Canada. So we have almost the same structure. I think the Canadian government has a little bit more power in certain areas, but pretty much it's the same thing. And the laws that do exist were written in 1938 and pretty much haven't changed since then. Now, I'm going to come back to why this is in a minute, but first I just want to tell you a little bit about who I am and who Siobhan is. So we're best friends. We're from Montreal. We grew up together, and we wrote this book, No More Dirty Looks, together, which is about the chemicals in personal care products, but it's also about things that you can use instead of these mainstream cosmetics that are filled with chemicals. So we're journalists. We're not scientists. It's important to make that distinction, but we've interviewed some of the top scientists in the community, and we've also interviewed people from the FDA. We've also interviewed the heads of the cosmetic and fragrance industry. They gave us some pretty unsatisfying answers for the record, but I'll come back to that also. So moving along, a couple of years ago, we were basically, beauty junkies. I'd say not hardcore beauty junkies, but the kind of girls who loved going to Sephora and other beauty stores and loading up on new cosmetics and going and getting our nails done a lot and going and getting our hair done, that sort of thing. And we really hadn't given any thought at that point as to what was in our products. Just knew that we liked products. We thought they were doing miraculous things for us, even though after a few months they usually always stopped working. But at the same time, we knew a lot about food. We practiced yoga. We wrote and researched things about the environment. So we were pretty much very aware of what was going on in our surroundings, but this was sort of a blind spot that we had. We never thought about these things that we were putting on our skin getting into our body. We were only thinking about, what we were eating, that sort of thing, which is actually pretty common. I think many women don't really think about the ingredients that are in their beauty products, at least until recently. But then we went for this treatment. This is almost 3 years ago now. We went for a treatment called the Brazilian Blowout. Now, the Brazilian Blowout these days is a pretty well-known treatment because it's gotten a lot of media attention recently, and actually Canada has pulled it off the market in the last couple of months. But at this time, nobody really knew anything about it. We decided to go to this salon in West Hollywood. We had a party to go to. We wanted to do something fun, so they convinced us to try this very expensive Brazilian Blowout. And what we were told was that it was made with keratin and it was really healthy for the hair, and that it was going to make our hair look amazing, which it actually did at first. And it was around a great thing. No warnings came with this treatment. And so we, willing guinea pigs that we were, hopped into these nice, comfy, fancy salon chairs, grabbed some magazines, and had this, it was like a cream that was flat ironed onto our hair. And as soon as this started, our eyes instantly began to burn. We were having trouble breathing. The salon ended up giving us goggles, and we're kind of staring at each other from across the salon. Siobhan was off in what was almost a closed room, which is just insane for me to think about now. And we were looking at each other like, what is this? But then our hair looked really, really good after the treatment. So we kind of ignored the fact that we'd totally been through some crazy toxic exposure and went on with our night. And it was only about a month or maybe a month and a half later that we came to realize that what we exposed ourselves to was formaldehyde. So like I said, about a month and a half in, our hair started looking not as good, and I could really still smell this sort of toxic smell in my hair, and it was giving me headaches, and we started getting concerned about it. So we, went on Google, really terrible idea when you're concerned about something, and found out that actually this treatment has formaldehyde in it. Now, formaldehyde is a known carcinogen. The National Cancer Institute, and recently the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which is basically the American government, have added it to the list of known carcinogens. Formaldehyde appears in a lot of things, but these particular treatments, the Environmental Working Group just did a study, and the one that we had contained 10% formaldehyde. To give you an idea, the industry sets a recommendation for formaldehyde that's less than 0.2%. These recommendations are not legally upheld, but that's what they suggest. So I do the math. It was a lot more times that, which is why we were having such an intense reaction. So of course, this got us thinking, how is it possible that you go to the hair salon and you're exposed to high levels of a carcinogen? It doesn't make sense. And that led us to a lot of questions about the cosmetics industry and a lot of very unsatisfying answers. So as I mentioned earlier, the cosmetics industry is basically what we call self-regulated. So like I said, there's no government involvement, really no third party doing testing, and the cosmetics companies themselves don't even actually have to prove in any way that their cosmetics are safe. In theory, they're supposed to be safe, but there's no checks and balances in place to show this. So the way that I like to put this into perspective for people is, say you and I want to start a cosmetics company tomorrow, or say Elvira and I want to start a cosmetics company. We have this great idea. We can go into the lab and create cosmetics formulations, slap on an ingredient label, and basically put our product to market without ever having to show that it's safe. And when you think about that, it starts getting a little bit scary, especially when you start finding out what's actually in cosmetics. And then, of course, I'm not trying to say that companies don't ever test their products, but think about it from a company's perspective. They test for immediate reactions. Obviously a company doesn't want someone to break out in hives when they try the product. But testing for long-term low-dose exposure, which is what most of us have, in other words, we all use whatever it is, 10, 15, 20 products a day. We use them for most of our lives. Very, very difficult to test for that sort of thing. And the reality is that we're just not testing for long-term low dose. When it comes to the fragrance industry, things get even worse. So the cosmetic industry and the fragrance industry obviously overlap, but they're separate. And the fragrance industry is protected under what we call trade secret laws. So these are business-friendly laws that allow fragrance companies not to reveal any of their ingredients. Now just think about that for a second. You could be using a perfume or anything that contains fragrance, and you cannot find out what is used in that fragrance formulation. You flip over your shampoo or your deodorant, you're going to see the word fragrance. That word might represent 10, 20, 50, 100, 200 other chemicals. And often the cosmetics company who buys the fragrance formulation doesn't even know what's in that fragrance formulation. They do this saying that, it's to protect companies from being ripped off. You've probably seen fake perfumes, like they rip off Chanel or something. But the reality is that if someone really wants to try to copy a perfume, you can just take that perfume to the lab and find out the ingredients. So obviously, I don't think that these trade secret laws should be in place because they protect the business and they don't protect the consumer. Our skin is our largest organ. You've probably heard this before. But did you realize that something like 60 to 65% of what you put on your skin gets inside your body? It's actually a really direct route into our bloodstream, into our fat tissue. Just think about, the nicotine patch or the birth control patch. That's why the skin is used, is because it's a very direct route for transdermal medications. And the same goes for the chemicals that are in beauty products. Many of them are actually getting inside our body. So what are these chemicals? What are these ingredients? Well, there's about 10,000 chemicals on record used in beauty products. In Canada, I think also, but at least in the United States, they've only banned 8. Whereas in Europe, they've actually banned close to 1,000, I believe. And products don't have any expiry dates on them. So when you think about that, you have to think that these formulations are created to sit on a shelf basically forever. And the emphasis is really put on ingredients that are stable and ingredients that are cheap because, of course, a company is just trying to increase their profit margins. So often, even with more expensive mainstream cosmetics, you're not actually getting good ingredients. You're just getting ingredients that really last for a long time on a shelf, which means they're filled with preservatives, they're often filled with dyes. Many products contain known carcinogens, like I mentioned, formaldehyde, a category called hormone disruptors, which are ingredients that once they get in your body actually affect your hormones, which these are really of serious concern now. And many products like lipstick, for instance, are even contaminated with things like heavy metals, like lead. And if you know anything about heavy metals, you know that you can be exposed to lead even in small amounts. And the reason why pregnant women aren't supposed to eat fish is because they're concerned about the heavy metal contamination in fish. And yet, are pregnant women told not to use lipstick? No, but maybe they should be. What do chemicals do once they're in our bodies? Of course, some chemicals are processed out easily. Some chemicals stay in our bodies. Things like lead actually bioaccumulate is the term, so they stay in and it just can keep building. But recent scientific studies have found all kinds of things. So we have here listed triclosan, which is an ingredient that's frequently used in soaps. Parabens, which you've maybe heard about, which is a preservative that's widely used, has been found in breast tumor tissue, which was a very scary thing. And you cannot extrapolate from that the parabens caused the tumor. But the fact that it's found in all this cancerous tissue is really cause for concern. They have phthalates or phthalates, or however you want to pronounce them. These are found in fragrances, which, though they're not listed, of course, as I mentioned, and all kinds of plasticizers that are used in cosmetics, as well as in the actual bottles that cosmetics come in. Oxybenzone, which is a really common ingredient in sunscreen. I think the study on oxybenzone, they took urine samples, and about 97% of people had it in their urine. So, like, some of these things are being processed out, some of them are staying in the body. Either way, they are causing some kind of chemical body burden. And the argument that the industry gives is, oh, it's just such a tiny amount, it's not doing anything. So one side of the argument, which we call the dose makes the poison. There's the other side of the argument, which is clearly where Siobhan and I stand, is that we just shouldn't have carcinogens or heavy metals or hormone disruptors in our products. Why would we intentionally add that stuff to our body burden? We already live in a really polluted world, and this is something that we can control. We call it it's our why bother theory, especially why bother using something that might not be safe when there are much better alternatives out there. So that's the philosophy that we subscribe to. Just to touch on hormone disruptors really quickly, because this kind of clarifies the argument about dosage. So that the industry defendants say the dose makes the poison, a little bit doesn't do anything. But if you actually look at a lot of the medications that we use, for instance, the birth control pill or something, those are actually really, really, really tiny amounts that completely change the way our hormones work. And with phthalates, this woman in the picture here, her name is Dr. Shauna Swan, really amazing researcher. You can see she was on 60 Minutes talking about this stuff. Dr. Swan did the first human study that showed that baby boys who had higher phthalate levels, who were exposed to higher phthalate levels when they were in vitro, actually have a higher occurrence of genital deformities. And animal studies are really wild because you basically see frogs when they're exposed to fairly low levels of phthalates. Certain frogs, the male frogs, won't even develop testes. They basically won't turn into male frogs. They sort of stay in this gender-neutral area. It's complete science fiction, and it's happening today. And Dr. Swan is now looking at young girls, and I'm very interested to see what her research is show, because we're seeing all of this early adolescence in 8-year-old girls. Are hormone disruptors playing a part? Maybe, maybe not. We'll see what the research says. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I'm very curious to see where this goes. And again, these are small, low-level exposure. But we don't want you to freak out. That's why we wrote this book. And there's luckily already a lot of people in this community who have freaked out and have these sort of aha moments. And really there are easy ways to reverse exposure. There's all kinds of amazing products out there. There are people who have started companies that you can really count on to be clean, who are really putting a product to market that's safe. And the other thing is that when you understand, this is what happened for us. When we started understanding what is actually being used in products, it was liberating to realize that on one hand we were being tricked and that we didn't have to spend money on all of these crazy creams and whatnot, that, one cream is probably enough, or you can really tell from the ingredients what is going to be good for you and what's going to be bad for you. So we no longer really felt victimized by this marketing and these industry laws. And the best part is that for us, we actually found that when we switched to clean cosmetics, we looked better, our skin was better, it was much less erratic. And I think that's because conventional beauty products, think about it, you're going to get a result from a conventional beauty product. So take something like shampoo. You know, when you use a foaming shampoo, it really strips your hair of all of its natural oils. So then you use conditioner. So then you use 1 or 2 or 3 leave-in products so your hair doesn't get frizzy. This is a theme across the cosmetics industry. Basically, products create needs for other products. But when you find cleaner cosmetics that are gentler and that work with your body and that use natural oils that complement the body, that are healthy for skin, you actually realize that you've been kind of screwing yourself, really, because you've been requiring more products because you're using products, if that makes sense. Yeah, basically a lot of stuff we don't need, and when you find a really good product, you do get results because natural ingredients give amazing results. Now, I also think it's really important not to just jump into this. A lot of people learn about this stuff, and, you know, like I said, we completely freaked out about it. But with the book, we really went category to category. We started with our body products because that was something easy for us to switch out, you know, things like soap or body cream. Then we moved on to our hair products because I think women are sort of accustomed to playing around with their hair. We didn't get to makeup and skin and face products until the end of the book. But it's okay. You can take baby steps and just changing out a couple of things that you use every day and over a large surface area will make a big difference in your exposure. A lot of women say, okay, but what do I do about hair dye? Or what do you think about Botox? And it's also important to realize that something like hair dye, where we don't really have amazing natural alternatives at this point. If hair dye is really important to you and it's making your life better because you've gone and you don't want to be gray or whatever it is, then don't stop using hair dye. If it really improves your quality of life, use your hair dye. Just focus on other areas because most of the products that we use actually don't do anything for us. So don't freak out about your favorite red lipstick or your hair dye or that sort of thing in the beginning. Just move slowly about the stuff that you care less about. Anyways, we don't all have to be perfect, right? We don't all eat perfectly. We don't all exercise every day. We're constantly making good and bad health choices for ourselves. We just all have to kind of do the best that we can. So what can you do immediately to take action to maybe switch over to some clean products and also help what we call the clean movement? Don't fall for greenwashing. So big companies are really becoming aware these days that the tides are turning and consumers are becoming more aware about ingredients. And there's a ton of companies out there that are trying to make you feel like they have created natural products. But the words natural and the words organic don't actually mean anything. Neither does green packaging, pretty leaves on bottles, and about 98% of the certification stamps. It sucks because those stamps look like they're official, but often they're not. Like everything else in this industry, language is not regulated. So for the most part, a company can make any claims, even something like not tested on animals. There's no regulation around that. Any company can claim that, and there's no legal recourse if they're lying, and nobody is actually checking to see if these products are natural or tested on animals or what have you. So the onus right now is really on us, the consumers. One thing that we can do is read our ingredient lists. Ingredient lists are the one thing that is required by law. So a company has to put all of their intended ingredients on a label. If that intended word, it means there are some holes because certain things like contaminants and byproducts, for instance, when two chemicals react together and they create a new chemical, those things won't be listed. But you'll see as you familiarize yourself with ingredients that you can kind of start seeing red flags and knowing when a product isn't clean just based on certain ingredients. And really right now that's the tool that we have. Now, the EWG that I mentioned earlier, which is the Environmental Working Group, this is a nonprofit organization that creates resources for consumers to make healthier choices. And one thing that they've built is called the Skin Deep database. Honestly, these guys can get a lot of flack sometimes because they're really pretty hardcore, but I always say that Siobhan and I never would have been able to write this book without the research that they've done, because they raise the money to send fragrances to the lab to check how much formaldehyde is in the Brazilian Blowout. And this is information that's not available anywhere else. And so they've created this database where you can type in an ingredient that you read on your bottle, something that has tons of X's and Y's in it and you can't even pronounce, and you can go to this site, type it in, and see what that ingredient is. And they created a rating system. So the higher it is, the worse. So if you type in an ingredient and it gets a 10, you want to avoid that ingredient. Whereas if it gets maybe a 2 or a 3, maybe it's not so bad. They're also really working hard to get new regulation in place. And just recently, a new act, the 2011 Safe Cosmetics Act, was introduced on Capitol Hill. If something like this act were to be passed, it would completely change the way cosmetics are regulated. So I think that the EWG really needs our support. They rely heavily on donations and spreading the word about what they're doing, I think is important. So to recap, things you can do right away. Read your labels. Obviously, read our book, read our blog, which is nomoredirtylooks.com. We constantly update everything on the blog every day. So any new developments that are happening, we usually have them on the blog. And we also review new products that we love. And the book also offers you a guide to products that are out there on the market, companies that you can trust, and things that we love. Visit the EWG website, support their efforts, and speak out. Write to your government, demand transparency. Call a company that you used to love and now know is using chemicals that you don't want in your body, and tell them, I'm not using your products anymore. You would be surprised by how responsive companies can be. They're just following the money. So if you stop spending your money on their products, they will change. That's how the food industry changed. And last but not least, spread the word. Tell your mother, tell your friend, tell your sister, tell your kid, tell your boyfriend. People should be informed so that they can make healthier choices for themselves when it comes to cosmetics. And saying nothing is stronger than the power of word of mouth.
Wow, Alexandra, that was quite a run through of all the different things that people need to look out for. And I think
a lot
some
of
people.
Information.
Well, some people, for example, myself, I can say that I'm fairly familiar with most of the things that you outlined. But I'm thinking about someone who hasn't been following at all. It might seem so overwhelming. And one of the things that you said that kind of stuck in my mind is the not even reading your label, not even paying attention to the words certified or organic is something you can trust. Can you talk a little bit more about why you can't trust certification? For example, USDA certification, certified organic.
So USDA certified organic you can trust, but that's a label that was developed for food, and many cosmetics not many, but certain really clean cosmetics companies have gone, because that's one of the few certifications you can trust, they have gone all the way and made their products food grade, which basically means you could eat them. And there are great products out there like that. But when you just see some unfamiliar certification labels stamped on there, with like a bunny or a leaf or that sort of thing, unless it's the USDA organic, there's a good chance that it doesn't mean anything. As I said, same with the words natural, organic, and so on.
So can people go to the Skin Deep database and actually put in that specific ingredient that has been listed as certified? Will that show up?
What I mean by the labels is that the label for the whole product. So sometimes you will have specific ingredients listed as certified, and maybe they are. What happens is, for instance, a company will claim that it's using organic ingredients, but when you go to read the label, the organic ingredients are the avocado oil, for instance, that's used maybe towards the bottom of the label. But everything else in there is not organic. So it becomes very confusing for consumers to be able to distinguish between what's a clean product and what's not a clean product, which is why you just have to look at the labels. Or read our book, turn to resources, and seek out companies that we've already vetted for you. And then just turn to those companies, because there are companies out there that you know
fall
you
for the
can
branding.
trust. Yeah.
Don't fall for the branding and actually read the list of ingredients and don't
Exactly.
die about it. I mean, some people may think, do I need to be a scientist in order to buy hand cream?
Well, usually if you see a ton of ingredients that look scientific and have those X's and Y's and the numbers in them, that's kind of stuff that you want to avoid, because a good, clean company, even if they're using scientific nomenclature, they'll always put in parenthesis what the source ingredient is, and that you can really tell right away. It might sound confusing hearing me say it, but you tell right away when you read those labels that you're dealing with a clean company.
So I noticed on nomoredirtylooks.com, your blog, that there's some questions that kind of keep popping up, and one of them is about deodorant.
People love deodorant.
Well, what do you recommend? I mean, can you find a deodorant that works and is clean?
Yes, we actually have, and we're really, really happy, because it was a hard journey. And up until probably 6 or 7 months ago, Siobhan always jokes, and we say this to our readers because we're not perfect. I use waterproof mascara to this day, chemical waterproof mascara, and Siobhan had this degree deodorant that she just kept around, in case, because the naturals would sort of work, but then you would still get sweaty or whatever. But there's a couple that we found now. One is this brand called Soapwalla that we're just obsessed with, and it really, really works. Another one is La Vanilla, which is a more expensive. It's like $18, but that was the first one we found that worked, so we were like, it doesn't matter, it's worth it. But now that we found Soapwalla, that's generally the one that we recommend. And if you go on the blog and just do a little search for deodorant, you'll see it'll come up right away.
Okay. Well, I guess another thing that I noticed is that in some cases you're sort of advocating, sort of choosing a clean product. In other cases, you're advocating going natural. And so I've heard that when it comes to sort of shampooing, that there are different out there that you don't even need to shampoo your hair.
Well, I don't shampoo my hair, but as you can see, I have really thick, coarse, dry hair. And when I was writing the book, I kept reading about this so-called no poo movement, which I think is just the worst one, but I like to call it the dirty movement. And so I thought, this will be a funny story for the book. I'm going to try not shampooing my hair, and I'll write about this. I'll write about this. I was working from home, so I wasn't too worried about seeing people and that kind of thing. Anyways, it did wonders for my hair. And you'll hear that very often from girls who have my type of coarse, curly hair. We need to keep our natural oils. So I just basically clean my hair with conditioner. I'll rinse conditioner through it in the shower. And now that I do that, I don't need any leave-in products. And I've heard from women with straight hair, too, that some love it as well. I don't think it's necessarily for everyone, but I do think that no matter what, when you switch to what I call cleaner shampoo, which isn't going to foam in the same way that you're used to, because those foams, first of all, they're contaminated with a carcinogen called 1,4-dioxane. But second of all, it's stripping your oils so much. So often when people make the switch at first, they're like, oh, this doesn't really feel like it's getting my hair clean. Just push through a week or two when you first make the switch to a cleaner product, and you're going to see your hair will be so much better behaved after.
So I guess this theory being that you want to keep your natural oils and the hair somewhat regulated.
Whether you quit washing altogether, there's a little transition period, or whether you're just switching to a cleaner shampoo, be mindful that in either case there is a transition period and your scalp is going to adjust. Because when you strip your scalp constantly, it begins to overproduce oil. And that's why people get really greasy roots, and then they wash more and they wash more and their hair gets greasier. And this is one of those kind of tricks that I was talking about in the cosmetics industry, because then you end up using more products and they end up making more money and you end up spending more money.
I'm wondering, Alexandra, also if you talk at some point in your book about the link between why women use so many products, like what the link is with body image.
It's not something that we get too deep into, because that's also kind of a whole other book. Obviously, the desire to beautify ourselves has been there. You know, people always trace it back to Egyptian times. On one hand, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that, you know, trying to make yourself look as beautiful as possible, and I think these pampering rituals can be really amazing for women, and I love makeup and its transformational capacity. You know, you can wake up in the morning feeling one day and you put on makeup and you feel ready for the world. I think there's a lot of positive to all of these things. But of course, industry is always going to play on our insecurities. So with these marketing campaigns, they create problems. You know, you'll be watching a commercial and it's like, do you have a weak nail bed? And all of a sudden you're looking at your nails and you're like, do I have a weak nail bed? You know, is your hair splitting, blah, blah, blah. All these things that are really actually problems, they will turn into problems so that they can sell you a product to fix that problem. And
I don't know what sorry.
No, I
don't know what a nail bed is.
A nail bed is it's just the bottom part of your nail.
But I do know about hair issues, and another thing that keeps coming that I've seen a few times on your blog is the discussion or the debate about to dye or not to dye, and you mentioned earlier about, well, if this is a thing that makes you feel good and it's okay, you don't have to be perfect, you can go ahead and use hair. But is that not in a way women sort of helping to perpetuate this trend that, well, it's not okay to be gray, to be a woman and to be gray?
And unfortunately that's a societal thing also. If 30-year-old woman goes completely gray, she's going to be looked at in a very different way. She's going to be looked at when she goes for job interviews in a different way. Every individual sort of has to balance out for themselves these choices, and we don't want to judge people for the choices that they make, because life is kind of hard enough as it is, and we're all just doing our best. That said, I have noticed, and it's something we've talked about on the blog, a lot of women are starting to embrace gray hair, which is great, and it's obviously something that we encourage. I think that gray hair can be really beautiful, and some women look, better with gray hair. Recently, my sister and I finally convinced my mother to just fully let her hair go silver because it looks so amazing on her. But again, we don't want to make sweeping judgments or be self-righteous or tell people that they shouldn't dye their hair. I'm starting to have gray hairs, and it's going to be something I'm going to have to think about in the next couple of years, do I cover them? Do I not cover them? And frankly, it's kind of a debate that I'm a bit torn on.
Well, as an anecdote, I can tell you that I was recently asked, did you do that intentionally or is that natural? And I took it as a compliment. Well, if it's perceived as something potentially intentional,
right,
it must
totally.
look good.
A friend of mine in Montreal actually told me a funny story. So she's quite gray, it's like salt and pepper, and she's in her early 30s. And she's just saying, do you know how often people come up to me and like point it out? Like they think I haven't noticed. Like, oh, whoa, do you know that you have a lot of gray hair? Because she's made the choice to just let herself go. Okay, she doesn't want to dye her hair. She has no problem with the way it looks. And people are almost so shocked by it that they couldn't believe that she would make that decision. So it cuts both ways. But hopefully, I think it's a kind of trend that may be changing.
Something to look out for, and my last question is kind of this idea of the toxic load, and you recommend sort of spreading the word and talking to our moms and sisters and friends,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of having that conversation with them. And I know I've had that conversation with people I know, and often the argument is, well, we get exposed to so many things anyways, and this is something that makes me feel good, and
right.
Really, why should I care? Or they don't see it as a potential harm, and they're not thinking really in the long term. What do you say when confronted with that?
Like I said, to me, this is something that we can control. We can't control times what even gets into our food or what's in the air or the water. But using our beauty products is something that we can control. And because there are amazing alternatives out there that will make you feel even better than the stuff you currently use, that's my argument, is if those alternatives didn't exist, fine. But there's great stuff out there and really affordable options and great DIY tricks that will make women feel even better than they feel now. So why knowingly expose yourself to something that's bad for you?
Well, with that, Alexandra, I want to thank you very much for joining us today in this webinar presentation. And just to remind everyone that this was brought to you by the Girls Action Foundation. If you want to know a little bit more about this national nonprofit organization based in Montreal, check out our website, girlsactionfoundation.ca. And if you want to know more about the Latest Spark campaign, you can do so by following this link, girlsactionfoundation.ca/latest spark. And we're going to be continuing with the webinar series, so please, when you do check out the website, you'll find out more information about upcoming webinars. And I want to pass the last word on to you, Alexandra. Do you want to close things off by maybe reminding people about your website address and your blog address if they want to continue doing more research about beauty products?
Definitely. So it's nomoredirtylooks.com is the blog. Obviously, that's the name of the book, too. And we have some pretty spirited conversations up there with our readers. I really feel like we've started to build this great community online, and people can ask us questions. So if this is something you want to know more about, go to the site. We have an email address also. We try to answer people's questions as often as we can. We do some consulting work too. So, yes, come visit us.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Have a great day.
Thank you.